Welcome back to the Real News Network and our coverage of the inauguration of President Barack Obama. In his speech, President Obama spoke of the difficulty of the crisis and the seriousness of the problems facing us, and particularly the economic crisis. And to help us sort out domestic issues and the economic crisis and what they expect from President Obama, I'm now joined by Robert Borisov, who's the president of the Institute for America's Future. Also, Glenn Ford rejoins us. Now, Glenn is filling in for Margaret Kimberly, and I make that point because Margaret was going to be the woman on the panel, and I say that because we're trying to take this with great seriousness. And but Glenn works with Margaret, and Glenn is the executive editor of blackagendareport.com. We're also joined by Matt Welch, who is the editor-in-chief of the monthly journal Reason, a leading libertarian journal. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Robert, I know you've been out there in the trenches fighting for the election of Barack Obama.
Right.
So how did this feel today?
Well, it was a historic turn, an extraordinary crowd and an extraordinary historic occasion, both in the president's person, the journey from slavery to an African American as president, but also in his speech where he marked the change from the conservative era of the last decades and made it clear we were going to abandon failed dogmas and move to a very different direction.
There's been a great deal of discussion over the course of the campaign of who is the real Barack Obama. I'm sure every newspaper has had something along those lines. We've had magazine covers, and everybody's tried to read into Obama what they hope Obama will be. And I would say particularly in the progressive section of the people that elected Barack Obama, kind of ignoring a lot of what he says. And I know I've spoken to a lot of ordinary African Americans who didn't even listen to the campaign rhetoric. They just say, well, that's what you say to get elected, but once he gets elected, he's going to do what needs to be done. So what about the campaign rhetoric, which is very centrist, and since he's been making his appointments on the whole, quite centrist appointments, and what you hope for?
Well, the appointments have been centrist. I think the campaign rhetoric wasn't as centrist as you paint it. We had, in the last month of this political campaign, the most ideological debate that we've probably had since Johnson Goldwater in this country, where Obama was campaigning against the failed economic philosophy of the last years, and McCain was accusing him of being a redistributionist socialist, and he didn't back down on his tax increases for the wealthy, on his spending programs in education.
Yeah,
and
I
energy.
actually was quite struck by that. Under the heat of that,
Yeah.
he says, "Well, my Bible says I should be my brother's keeper," and he didn't vacillate on this kind of Cold War.
So he presented himself, I think, as a progressive alternative to where we've been, and in a more ideological fashion than most of our candidates ever do. His appointments have been, from the Clinton bench and almost by definition centrist. I think what's interesting is the crisis is much greater. And so what's been interesting to me to watch, I think of Barack Obama as a cautious, in policy terms, a cautious man. He tries to be someone who brings people together, finds common ground, and moves forward. But the crisis has driven him to be far bolder than he would have been, say, a year ago. So we're now talking about passing in the next week or two an $850 billion recovery plan, which is probably too small, but is far greater than anything anybody imagined even 4 months ago.
Matt, the stimulus package is going to get passed pretty quickly, but a lot of economists are saying, and then what? This money gets kind of sprayed into the economy. It's not entirely clear where the money's coming from. And does it actually deal with any of the underlying issues? What is, first of all, your take on the speech and where Obama seems to be headed in terms of his domestic policy?
Well, I thought the speech was also a very historic moment. It hit a lot of notes about where we are and how we've progressed as a country. And I think that you have to be a real cold-hearted son of a bitch, and I try to be, to not be moved by that. For my money, I would prefer a inauguration speech that was attended by 25 people and not 2 million, just in terms of, I think that we all suffer from a kind of cult of the presidency, and we did under Bush, and we will under Obama certainly, and we did under Lyndon Johnson and FDR and Richard Nixon. I think that we bestow too much, we expect too much from the president to deliver us from all of our ills and to move us and shake us, and that I think will also be reflected in his approach towards economic policy, and that's what is sort of keeping me up at night a little bit on this. He made a lot of interesting notes comportmentally about leaving old dogmas behind without actually talking about whatever new dogmas and old dogmas that he's embracing himself. It's easy in a moment when you win an election pretty big, and you win it running, actually, I think, to the left economically of Bill Clinton, certainly, and probably Al Gore. But they won by a comfortable enough margin where he's now reaching out to the right in many different ways and trying to say, hey, look, it's not about ideology now, it's all about centrism. Well, it's because you won by a big amount. I think what we're going to see coming up is, $800 billion stimulus packages that are and already have been just swollen with pork. I mean, it's not like we're creating a new way to fund transportation in this country. We're just throwing more money at it and saying, what projects do you have lying around? We're going to throw money at it. And in this, it's not a new Obama thing. Obama is...
But is this what has to be done because they got to do something like now, and then in theory there'll be a grand strategy?
Well, I heard that same talk after 9/11, I think, about the Patriot Act. I mean, there's Bush's response. It's not an accident that Bush responded the same way to 9/11 as he did, basically, I think, to the economic crisis here, which is, we've got to pass something, we'll figure out the details later. The details actually do matter. If you throw nothing but money at a problem that was, at heart, in many ways, created because there was too much money being thrown at non-problems. And we had a very loosened credit atmosphere here, chasing any deal that it could, and eventually that's going to create various asset bubbles. Okay, so how do we fix that? Let's loosen up the credit again. Granted, you do have to loosen up credit between banks and all that kind of interbank lending and such, but we are not, I don't think, in a position where we're going to swallow any kind of difficult medicine in this scenario. What we're doing is we're just throwing more money at the problem. Eventually, that has to lead to inflation. There's no way that it doesn't. That sounds like crazy talk right now because we're in an asset deflation standpoint, and the economy is in recession, and it could get a lot worse in a hurry. But you cannot just print money hand over foot without eventually creating something on the other side.
Well, on that note, creating something on the other side, there was a meeting a few days ago. Apparently, President Obama met with David Brooks, Krauthammer, William Kristol, and George Will at Will's house, and they had dinner. And Brooks reports from that dinner that he's confident that in a couple of years after all the stimulus spending, Obama will take on entitlement programs, Medicaid and Social Security, and start to roll back this stuff. So what does all that mean?
Well, Obama has more than signaled. He's basically told us that he's going to put Social Security and other so-called entitlements on the table, which really translates into we'll put them on the chopping block. And that bodes very ill. And what is upsetting about this is that he wasn't forced to do this. This didn't happen because of Republican pressure. It was not in the heat of battle. It was a voluntary initiative on his part to put Social Security out there. Many of us thought that we had already fought the battle of Social Security in Bush's first term and that we won. Apparently, we didn't.
Well, I agree with that he put it out there, and he needn't have because it's not in crisis now. But what's interesting, if you look at the substance of his answer, the substance of his answer is, I will raise the lid on the taxes so that we have enough money to pay for Social Security, and the substance of his answer on Medicare is we need universal health care reform. Both of those are the progressive answers to those questions. And so I think when Brooks may have gotten a promise from Obama that he didn't understand if Obama stays with that progressive position.
Well,
and let's keep in mind, too, what Obama was doing with that dinner was that he was, discovering what kind of cheap dates A-list conservative commentators are, but he is buying himself some breathing room so that he can do other things. So if he fosters the belief that, 2 years from now, 3 or 4 years from now, he's going to do whatever thing it is that I think is important later, then they're going to give him cover now. And it's a politically shrewd move on his part. I would be surprised if he went after entitlements anytime soon, precisely because we just did go through this battle, and it energized Democrats in the Democratic base. I don't think that he's going to be eager to go after and alienate the Democratic base that just swept him to victory.
Well, it's not entirely up to him. This bailout, and it's an ongoing process, is an open-ended process, and at some point the crunch does come, or people declare that the crunch time has come, and that time is sooner rather than later. And I think that's why he initiated the conversation sooner rather than later.
In the next segment of our interview, let's take some of the actual quotes from his speech and deconstruct them. The role of government, the role of the markets, does it represent a new mindset? Does it represent something that, if one takes into account the idea that everyone says, our great leader in the economy said my logic was flawed about the economy, is there going to be a new approach or not? And does this speech tell us anything about that? So please join us for the next segment of our interview on Barack Obama, the economy, and the economic crisis. Thank you.